Today I'm going to talk about risk-taking in the context of DePIN. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone what risk-taking is in the context of Ethereum, and maybe zoom in a bit better just to kind of align on what risk-taking is in the first place. So if you look at risk-taking in the context of Ethereum, it's basically allowing protocols to build on the same resource, which is the security that Ethereum allows protocols to build on. So you would think of these EVSs as basically networks that are building on top of Ethereum, but they are sharing the same resource, which is the stake that validators actually have, and they are basically bringing more value to the end user by actually doing two activities at the same time. If you look at the stakers, basically what they're getting multiple rewards because they would get the reward of Ethereum, and they would also get the additional reward by risk-taking into a separate protocol. Well, if you look at what the networks get, they're basically not paying for the security of the network by themselves. Imagine having to bootstrap a network of stakers. You would need to have, like, first a bunch of miners that actually do it, and they need to be incentivized. Then you need to have a bunch of liquidity that needs to be locked on these miners. There is a bunch of coordination that goes into this. All of this is cost that each of the network needs to cover themselves. And usually what they do is they do that by providing some inflation through the block rewards. And ultimately, this is sell pressure on their economy. Now, if you look at the DePIN, it basically has very similar problems because you do not need to get the security from the core network, but you need to get the resource. So you need to execute the job somehow. It's either a storage job, like in the context of Filecoin, or it is a compute job in the context of Fluence. But these jobs need to be executed on the validator, and this matching needs to happen somehow. Now, for the stakers, what they care about at the same time is basically the same as Ethereum, which is maximizing the utility of their liquidity by increasing the yield. So at the end of the day, like, the token holders want to be greedy and earn as much as possible from their liquidity. While for the protocols, they have the same exact problem as what protocols have in the context of Ethereum, which is we want to reduce the cost that it actually takes us to run our infrastructure. Now we are not dealing with security, so we do not need something like eigenlayer, but we do need this layer of resources on top of which we can actually run the jobs of our DePIN networks. So how this specifically looks like in the context of Ethereum is that you have Ethereum stakers and validators that basically are combining together resources to provide a utility to the networks that are building on top of the risk-taking protocols. And at the end of the day, what happens is that these networks have the same utility, but at a much lower cost because they're sharing the cost with the Ethereum, and most of these validators are already running Ethereum. While for the EVS, it's basically allowing them to tap into a resource pool that is already there, which is consensus security from Ethereum, and they're also able to provide additional yields to the validators running their stack. If you look at what we do in the context of DePIN, it's basically the same. It's just a different context because the paradigm is very different. Now you're not doing transactions on Ethereum, where this is the main utility that you provide, but rather you're doing a job that requires a resource. This job needs to be either some kind of compute or it needs to be storage, but ultimately this job requires this resource, and this resource needs to be provided by a hardware provider. Now, the difference is that in this particular context, instead of reusing the liquidity twice, because the security is the main paradigm here, you need to use the hardware in ways that it's more efficient in order to be able to share the cost between the different DePIN networks. So you're not able to use the same GPU for two workloads at the same time because that's infeasible. But what you're able to do is you're using the same providers by using the resources on these providers on multiple DePIN networks, which also allows you to do cool things like interop between the networks and other things that I might cover in the Q&A later. But if you look at the providers, it's basically a dream come true for them. They hook up some hardware into our network, and they would get like all the jobs from all of these networks, and magically they would earn like rewards from multiple networks without them having to worry about staking, liquidity, or what is the protocol that they should be working on, or a bunch of the infrastructure work that they need to take care of by themselves. Now, let's take as an example the biggest DePIN network out there, which is Filecoin. So Filecoin today, by far, is the biggest network in the context of DePIN. First, because it provides like the biggest rewards to the providers, and also in the context of how much capacity of hardware there is, like it's by far the largest one. It currently backs 8 exabytes of capacity. 2,000, 3,000 providers are participating in this network, and it's generating the most block rewards out there. If you run Filecoin on top of our stack, you would get like, now these are like a bunch of flaws, but I don't want to get into details on Filecoin. But if you run Filecoin on top of our stack, you'd basically get 80% reduction in terms of cost. So for Filecoin, you have 2 phases. One is the onboarding of the capacity and the data. For this cost, like it's 80% more efficient. And this was just by decoupling multiple roles, compute providers and storage providers. Then you get 5x cost reduction in terms of recurring cost. So this, in the context of Filecoin, is just keeping drives on. And you get like the possibility of getting additional rewards because now like the stack is focused on allowing you to provide the storage utility, which allows you to get additional rewards. You can think of this like the MEV of DePIN, where you have rewards that are not coming only from block rewards, but rather are coming from people that actually need the storage, which was unfeasible just by having Filecoin by itself. So to wrap things up, if you're able to combine multiple networks, you're sharing the costs between multiple networks, and in that way you can increase the yields that you're providing to the token holders. You're helping like innovation because now like you can combine multiple networks to talk between each other because they are running like consumer machines. You have an open market, so like anyone can join, and ultimately this just helps like keep like the momentum and make the flywheel turn. I think that's it. Happy to take questions.
Questions, unless everyone has a complete understanding of restaking. No question. Can you talk about maybe the process for onboarding different DePIN projects and how that would work?
Yeah, actually there are like many complexities that I kind of intentionally left out here. But in order for you to participate in these DePIN networks, you need to build staking on top. So like the way that you actually are part of a DePIN network is by having a stake in the network. So if you want to integrate with a network, we would basically build a staking derivative for them. This staking derivative is likely going to have the highest APY because like if you're sharing the resource between like multiple DePIN networks, you're able to like pass more of the rewards back, which gives you like the highest APY. And yeah, like we would have this derivative on Ethereum, which also helps these economies in the context of DePIN have like more demand for their tokens because ultimately there is an asset that is incurring in value on Ethereum and you're exposed to the volume there. And it would also be part of our consensus by having it part of our treasury because all of the rewards that we as a protocol are getting, we are never dumping because like ultimately we want to grow with the networks that we support.
And so how difficult is it for a project to create that type of derivative?
So the projects themselves care about their economy. So like most of the projects, at least it's still very early days for DePIN, but what we have seen coming from Protocol Labs and building Filecoin is that everyone is going to need to lock liquidity on the validator. So like the definition of the economy is going to be on that layer. And what's going to happen is that like all of these projects will need a staking derivative. So either they just build like stuff on top of our stack by reusing the templates that we have provided and allowing our providers to actually run their stack, or it's going to be yeah, basically running validators themselves, which is super expensive, or letting the community kind of figure it out, which from the experience of Protocol Labs was not ideal. We basically wasted hundreds of millions of dollars of incentives just to bootstrap Filecoin, which we don't think any DePIN project should do. Like, we should all share the same resource layer, and like on top of that, we should create like a bunch of compute networks that are specialized for the individual jobs.
And can you also discuss the liquid component of it and how that works in detail? I think that's something that I think people understand staking, but the liquid piece of it is another hurdle.
Yeah, so usually in DePIN, maybe I take the example of Filecoin, you need to lock for a particular amount of time. So you would lock for 6 months, 24 months. And for 24 months, your liquidity is locked in Filecoin. Most of the people don't want to do that. Like, most of the people want to have liquidity that they can use for other things. And usually this liquidity also needs to be on a network where they can do stuff with it, like a DeFi and so on. So what we do is, other than just locking the liquidity inside the validator, we also make it liquid, similar to what Lido is doing for staking on Ethereum, where you can use that liquidity still on Ethereum, and you can unstake if you want, which is not possible by default, like by doing that on just the providers directly. There are a few folks building like lending in the context of DePIN, but that is kind of hard, because like if you're doing lending and you're borrowing lending some funds to someone, and someone is borrowing from you, usually there is like a fixed interest rate or something like that, which kind of does not allow you to unstake the funds. But because we are interacting with the providers directly and basically building the stack, running the jobs, we're able to unstake these funds either by terminating storage jobs or by doing less jobs on the compute side. So we are able to actually manage the risk and like unstake if that really needs to happen. But looking also at what happened with Lido and what we are experiencing is that most of the time you're really not going to unstake from the protocol, but rather you'll have a buffer on Ethereum that is able to like match with the demand for staking.
And so if you're able to have liquid staking, presumably people will require a lower return rate, right? And so you would think investors and token holders would not demand the same level of reward if they're not locked up for 24 months, right? So, but yeah, you are able to fulfill that 24-month lock. So there's an arbitrage in between those durations, I would think, right?
Yeah, it really depends on how good are you at deploying the liquidity inside of the individual protocols. For Filecoin, we're very good, because ultimately it's about figuring out like the liquidity requirement for the different kind of jobs. I'm not going to get too much into the details, but for Filecoin you have committed capacity, which is 1/10 of the liquidity requirement, and verified capacity, which is 10x. So if you're playing around with committed capacity versus verified capacity, you can actually like be super close to like full capital efficiency, which you just can't do like with the lending, because for lending you need to have a very big buffer, otherwise you run into bank run problems, which we have seen already in the Filecoin ecosystem. There were protocols doing lending that basically experienced a bank run. When the crypto market went up, people wanted to exit, and these protocols just couldn't pay back like the stakers, and they experienced a bank run.
And that, I guess, that can't happen in the liquid staking only because there isn't the obligation to pay. It's more of a best efforts in terms of liquidity, is that right?
So it can't happen in staking because you are staking the liquidity inside the protocol. And when you stake the liquidity inside the protocol, you also build a strategy on how you're going to unstake it. That's why it cannot happen. When you build the liquid part on top, they're just making it liquid. And then you use these strategies of unstaking from the protocol to actually do it. If you do lending, you're delegating the staking to the provider that would then like lock that liquidity. As far as you're concerned, like your interaction with the protocol ends there. Like you are not really interacting with the protocol, but delegating the responsibility of locking the liquidity inside the protocol or staking. So it's not really staking in the context of lending, it's lending.
And so then what you're implying is that there is a cost. And so you build in exit scenarios, de-stake, there'll be a price to that, and that's a price that your liquidity demanders or liquidity desirers will be comfortable paying, but at a price, they're out. right?
Yeah, yeah. And to be a bit more specific and maybe give an example, so let's take compute and let's take storage. For storage, like you have these ways of basically unstaking by not providing the storage anymore because storage is a continuous operation that you do for the network. Well, for compute, you can basically reduce the amount of compute that you're providing. So for example, in the context of Fluence, you would just stop providing Fluence resources to the Fluence network if you don't have the liquidity. It's easy as that. Like you're not locking for like years. In the context of Falcon, it's basically just reducing the capacity that you're providing for the Falcon network. But again, if you're doing lending, you can do none of this because you're not the one actually locking the liquidity and interacting with the protocol, but rather it's the provider that does the act of providing the utility that does the staking for you.
Can you talk about scale? Like if DePIN goes to the level that we all expect it to go, this staking will be an enormous business. So can you kind of help frame context size, either in Filecoin or just across the whole DePIN ecosystem? Like where do you see this going?
Yeah, so let me zoom out for a second. So like if you look at DePIN, like each of the DePIN networks is basically a product on AWS. So like you can think of Fluence as Lambda functions on AWS. You can think of Falcon not as S3, but maybe as a cold line layer of S3. So Falcon is not like super good for hot storage. Probably we'll see other protocols doing it. And if you take like each of these products, it's probably going to be a protocol solving that product. If you take the size of AWS, that's just one provider. And if you look at what we're doing in crypto for like other things, for example, like Ethereum, even the size of the financial side is larger and can be larger than like the entire like centralized financial institution play, because ultimately it's an open network. So like you're not attacking like a particular horizontal in a particular market, for example, the US or European market like AWS, but you're basically covering the entire horizontal. So like it's also going to go to China, it's also going to go to Russia, it's going to go to all these places where like AWS cannot work today. So you take, and basically what this means is that you take probably the size of AWS and you multiply that by 5, and then you like look at that market, and that's probably just the beginning. And it could be even larger with all the demand that we're getting on the compute side.
I mean, that's obviously vast. And how do you think about that in terms of scaling your protocol and your business to meet that demand?
Yeah, for us, it's really like being very clear on like the rewards that our providers get, because ultimately for us, it's enabling super efficient hardware. And if you want to enable super efficient hardware, there is no stuff like, oh, we are going to airdrop you like whatever, maybe at some point. Folks are trying to survive, and like when they have scale of 200 petabytes, 1 exabyte of capacity, like 10% really means a lot to them, and they need to know that exactly how much they're going to make, because it's a low margin business. They are providing just the hardware, and they need to like run with their business, and usually it's like 3 folks that are managing a big data center. Like it's not like this big whatever organization like Coinbase doing staking. So like in the context of DePIN, like staking is going to be very different, because you need this resource. You need to run the data center. You need the hardware. You need the actual physical space. So for us, it's really being clear on unit economics, making sure that our providers are not incurring any risk, absorbing like most of the risk from the crypto fluctuations, which is kind of preventing crypto from being efficient, because like if you're going to be out of business like the next cycle because like you did not plan well like with your block rewards, we're really not going to get there like in 5 years. Like it's going to take the cycles to get much weaker for DePIN to even be possible. So like we don't think that's the right approach. That's why we want to kind of buffer like all the risk from the token fluctuations and reward providers in usually stable coins, because that's what they prefer.
You're giving a preview of my talk, but what you sort of implied this, but so make it more specific, advice to people starting protocols or interested in launching in the DePIN space along the token economics line that you were just referencing.
Yeah, I would say like don't take the hard route, which is basically building like everything from scratch. We at Protocol Labs made many mistakes, like probably you can learn from us. You can learn from other protocols, like many protocols failed, like Golem failed to a degree, like haven't seen much. Like many compute protocols already failed. And what you actually want to do is like define the workload, the focus on your community. So for example, if you want to focus on rendering AI, like focus just on that. Your job is to actually create the tooling that will onboard like more demand for that particular job. It's not to work with the providers. It's not to like do all the things that all these other protocols have done already, but it's rather to really focus on bringing more demand. And this goes through the tooling. Like the tooling needs to be much better. And we have seen that at Protocol Labs, like the tooling is essential. Like you want to onboard, you want to like be fast on like how you're enabling the final utility, which is storage. And everything else, like try to like delegate that to someone else, try to like use stuff that is already there. So if you can use like hardware that you shared across like many DePIN networks, do that. Like it's gonna save you so much cell pressure. And you can also kind of postpone like the token launch. You can do like things on your own, like by actually just like having less cell pressure on your economy.
How many token or how many storage, compute, other type of projects do you expect to be live and at some level of scale in, say, 5 years? Do you think it's a winner take all? Is it very diversified? How do you see that ecosystem building?
As I mentioned before, like every product that you see on AWS, that's a network. So like I think even that is kind of not true. Like every of these products have like a sub-product inside. So like we expect thousands, which is why even though like we started 3 years ago, we didn't want to focus on the network itself because we were like, it's going to be like so much competition there. Like let's just enable these networks by providing the resource because everyone will need the resource. So like we expect like at least 100, probably more than 1,000.
And any particular parts of that stack you think need products sooner, or you would like to see someone building something in? Or you see opportunity for someone who wants to launch a protocol?
Yeah, I think like there is a big demand in the context of training big neural networks or LLMs. So at least use cases that we're focused on is enabling people to read from Filecoin. That's actually a lot of compute just to read from Filecoin. Pushing that through Fluence, for example, doing ETL pipelines, and then pushing that to the next thing. Like building the ETL pipelines and all of that stuff needs to be built. Like that could be a protocol running on top of Fluence, which is a separate protocol with a separate economy. Like most of these protocols are going to interact through the economies at the end of the day.
Any questions from the crowd? I've monopolized this for a while. Any other questions? No more questions from anybody. Oh, yes, question.
Hi, short question. It seems that you're able to connect to the Filecoin virtual machine and Ethereum-based virtual machines. Is that the limit today, and do you intend to broaden that out to other types of smart contract networks?
So ultimately, all the VMs are more on the economics. So like we use, of course, the FVM because like that's the way that our economy interacts with the Ethereum economy. But all the compute, all the storage, it's kind of not on the FVM yet. Those are like messages on the Filecoin networks. And like, sure, those are going to get more structured. And by the way, like I think there is a lot of space there for people to actually work on that, like just structuring like storage deals, structuring compute deals, like all of that needs to be somehow organized for people to have like a Ethereum-like experience in the context of DePIN. So right now, like we're mainly using these VMs to have like to allow staking from Filecoin to Ethereum, because ultimately we want people to be able to stake on Ethereum and use that in DeFi protocols and keep increasing the yields that they can possibly get by increasing the utility that they get from their liquidity. But it's not yet on the compute side. It's basically just for economics.
Short follow-up. And when do you add Fluence network into your offering?
So Fluence network is going through like a slow ramp up of providers. They're doing that by kind of keeping liquidity requirements low in the beginning just to get more providers. We have everything ready to launch our stuff. as soon as they actually increase this capacity, and like Tom can comment more on that, but the capacity is going to be 10x more. When there is 10x more capacity requirement, there is also more liquidity requirement. At this point, by ourselves, we own enough Fluence to actually back the nodes that we currently have on the network.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, let's give a round of applause to Vuk.